The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor with a sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient murmur like a blade through silk. Marcus Wellington III didn't even glance down at the fragments catching the candlelight, his cold gray eyes fixed instead on the woman in the black apron who stood frozen beside his table, her hands still extended from where she'd been setting down his entree. "This," he said, his voice carrying the particular brand of disdain that only comes from inherited wealth and practiced superiority, "is supposed to be beef bourguignon?" He gestured dismissively at the plate before him, where tender chunks of beef glistened in a rich, wine-dark sauce beside perfectly turned vegetables. "I've had better food at a gas station." The waitress, Sofia according to her name tag, remained perfectly still, her dark eyes unreadable. Around them, the dining room of Le Jardin had fallen into that peculiar hush that descends when public humiliation is unfolding. If you're enjoying this story of kitchen secrets and restaurant drama, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes tales from the culinary world. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths and carefully arranged roses, but the elegance felt suddenly fragile, as if Marcus's words had the power to crack the very foundations of refinement. "Sir," Sofia said quietly, her voice carrying just the hint of an accent that might have been French, or perhaps something more complex, layered like the sauce he was dismissing. "Perhaps I could speak with the chef about your concerns." Marcus laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "The chef? Please. This establishment clearly doesn't understand the first thing about fine dining." He stood abruptly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the table. His suit, tailored to perfection, probably cost more than most people made in a month. "I've dined at Le Bernardin, at the French Laundry, at restaurants that have earned their stars through actual excellence, not whatever provincial attempt at cuisine this is supposed to represent." Behind Sofia, other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An elderly couple at the corner table exchanged worried glances. A young man celebrating what appeared to be a job promotion with his girlfriend found his smile fading as the confrontation escalated. The maître d', Henry, approached with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. "Mr. Wellington," Henry said, his own French accent thick with diplomatic courtesy, "please allow me to—" "Don't." Marcus held up a hand without looking at him, his attention still fixed on Sofia like a predator studying prey. "I'm addressing the person responsible for serving me this insult to my palate." He picked up his fork and stabbed at a piece of beef, holding it up as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "Look at this. Overcooked. The sauce lacks depth, complexity. There's no understanding of the delicate balance between wine and stock, no appreciation for the way proper technique should transform simple ingredients into something transcendent." Sofia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I understand your disappointment, sir. Perhaps—" "Disappointment?" Marcus's voice rose, causing several diners to look away in embarrassment. "This isn't disappointment. This is bewilderment. How does a restaurant in this part of the city, charging these prices, serve food that wouldn't qualify as mediocre in Paris? I've eaten at Michelin-starred establishments across 3 continents, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that whoever prepared this dish has no business calling themselves a chef." Around the restaurant, the atmosphere had grown thick with tension. The soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed too loud now, inappropriate. Servers moved between tables with the careful efficiency of people trying to maintain normalcy in the face of chaos. In the kitchen, just visible through the pass window, figures in white coats moved like ghosts, their faces turned toward the dining room where their work was being dissected with surgical cruelty. Sofia set the plate down and straightened, her posture perfect despite the verbal battery she had endured. "Sir, if you'd like to speak with the chef directly." "The chef? Yes, I think I would like that very much. I want to look the person responsible for this culinary catastrophe in the eye and explain to them exactly how they failed. Not just failed me, but failed the very concept of what food can be when prepared with skill, with passion, with respect for the ingredients and the diner who trusts you with their experience. Henry stepped forward again, his face pale. "Mr. Wellington, perhaps we could discuss this more privately." "No." Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. "I think everyone in this room should hear this. They should understand what they're paying for, what they're accepting when they choose to dine at an establishment that clearly doesn't understand the standards that separate true cuisine from cafeteria food." He gestured broadly at the other diners, many of whom were now staring at their own plates with newfound uncertainty. "Look around you. These people deserve better. They deserve to know that when they spend their hard-earned money on what promises to be a fine dining experience, they're not being served the amateur efforts of someone who learned to cook from YouTube videos."
The young man celebrating his promotion quietly asked for the check. The elderly couple had stopped eating entirely, their anniversary dinner ruined by the spectacle unfolding before them. Near the bar, a woman dining alone watched the scene with the fascinated horror of someone witnessing a car accident. Sofia remained perfectly still, her dark eyes never leaving Marcus's face. There was something in her expression now, a quality that hadn't been there before. Not fear or anger, but a kind of careful assessment, as if she were studying a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. This confrontation is about to take an incredible turn. If you're invested in seeing how this plays out, hit that like button and share this story with anyone who's ever worked in restaurants. "The chef," she said finally, her voice carrying a different note now, something that might have been amusing if the circumstances had been different, "is currently occupied with other responsibilities, but I can assure you that your concerns will be addressed." "Occupied?" Marcus laughed again, the sound echoing off the restaurant's high ceilings. "Let me guess. Too busy microwaving the next course? Perhaps struggling with the complex challenge of opening a can of sauce?" He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "I want to speak with the person who destroyed what could have been a perfectly good piece of beef. I want them to explain to me how they justify calling themselves a chef when they clearly don't possess even the most basic understanding of French cuisine." The kitchen doors swung open suddenly, and a tall man in chef's whites emerged, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This was clearly the head chef, and he moved with the quick, decisive steps of someone who had finally heard enough. "Sir," the chef began, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "I prepared that dish personally. Every element was—" "You!" Marcus turned his predatory gaze on the newcomer, and Sofia seemed to fade into the background, forgotten for the moment. "You're the one responsible for this travesty. Do you have any idea what beef bourguignon is supposed to taste like? Have you ever eaten at a restaurant that actually deserves the title of fine dining?" The chef's face darkened. "Sir, with respect, that dish was prepared according to traditional techniques." "Traditional?" Marcus's voice rose to a near shout. "There's nothing traditional about what you served me. The meat was tough, the sauce was flat, the vegetables were overcooked. You've taken a classic dish and turned it into cafeteria food. If Julia Child could see what you've done to her legacy, she'd weep." Sofia moved quietly behind the bar, beginning to clear glasses with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. But her eyes remained fixed on the confrontation, and there was something in her expression now that suggested she was making calculations, coming to conclusions that would have surprised everyone in the room if they had known what she was thinking. "And in 15 years, you've learned nothing," Marcus snapped, dismissing the chef entirely. The chef's professional composure was cracking. "Sir, I can prepare you something else." "Something else?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What could you possibly prepare that would redeem this disaster? If you can't execute a basic French braise, what makes you think you can handle anything more complex?" He looked around the restaurant, taking in the faces of staff and diners alike, all watching with varying degrees of fascination and horror. This is what passes for fine dining in this city. This is what people accept when they should demand excellence. Sofia had moved closer now, still clearing tables with that same fluid grace, but positioning herself where she could hear every word. There was something about her presence that seemed different now, as if she had shed some invisible weight and was standing straighter, moving with more confidence. Her hands, as they worked, displayed a precision that went beyond mere efficiency. Every movement was economical, purposeful, the hands of someone who understood the value of perfect technique. The chef opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The sauce," he said now, holding up a spoonful of the dark, glossy liquid, "should be the heart of this dish. It should be complex, layered, with notes of wine and herbs, balanced against the richness of properly rendered fat and the deep, meaty essence of a well-made stock. Instead, what you've created tastes like brown water with a hint of wine thrown in as an afterthought." He let the sauce drip back onto the plate with theatrical disgust. This is what happens when people who don't understand the fundamentals try to cook professionally. They follow recipes without understanding the science behind them, the chemistry that transforms individual ingredients into something greater than the sum of their parts.
The elderly couple at the corner table finally stood up, the woman's eyes bright with unshed tears as her husband gently helped her with her coat. Their anniversary dinner was ruined, and they moved toward the exit with the careful dignity of people trying to preserve what remained of a special evening. Marcus didn't even notice their departure, too focused on his verbal assault to register the collateral damage he was causing. "And the meat," he continued, his voice gaining momentum like a runaway train, "should be fork tender after proper braising. It should practically fall apart when you look at it, infused with the flavors of wine and aromatics, transformed from tough cuts into something sublime through patience and technique." He cut into the beef with his knife, the meat parting easily. "Instead, this is chewy, under-seasoned, cooked without understanding or care." Sofia had positioned herself directly behind him now, and there was something almost predatory in her stillness. She watched him with the intense focus of a cat preparing to pounce, her earlier deference replaced by something much more dangerous. The chef made one last attempt at professional courtesy. "Sir, I understand you're not satisfied with your meal. If you'll allow me to prepare something else—" "No!" Marcus's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade. "I want everyone here to understand what real standards look like. I want them to know that when they accept mediocrity, they're doing a disservice to themselves and to the art of cooking itself." He stood up fully now, his presence dominating the dining room. "This restaurant should be ashamed to serve food like this. The chef should be embarrassed to put his name on dishes that demonstrate such a fundamental lack of understanding about what fine dining actually means." He looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of diners and staff who had been forced to witness his performance. "This is why I only trust restaurants that have earned their reputation through excellence, that understand that cooking isn't just a job, it's a calling that demands everything you have to give." Sofia stepped forward then, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She set down the glasses she'd been holding and looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the confrontation began. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying a new quality now, not the deferential tone of a server, but something else entirely, something that made the chef look at her with sudden confusion and the maitre d' take a step back in surprise. "What?" Marcus turned to her with irritation, annoyed at being interrupted in his moment of triumph. Sofia smiled then, an expression that transformed her entire face, revealing intelligence and confidence that had been hidden beneath the careful mask of service industry professionalism. "I was wondering," she said, her accent more pronounced now, carrying notes of sophistication that spoke of training in the finest kitchens of France, "if you would like to know who actually prepared your beef bourguignon." The question hung in the air like the aroma of a perfectly reduced sauce, complex and impossible to ignore. Sofia Marcher stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that suddenly seemed less subservient and more like the stance of a general preparing for battle. The transformation was subtle,
but unmistakable. The way she held her shoulders, the angle of her chin, the steady confidence in her dark eyes that spoke of secrets carefully guarded, but now ready to be revealed. Marcus Wellington III frowned, his perfectly styled hair catching the chandelier light as he tried to process what felt like a shift in the room's dynamic. "What are you talking about? The chef just told us." "The chef," Sofia said, her voice carrying that same musical accent but with new layers of authority. "The chef told you that he prepared the dish, and technically that's true. He plated it, he added the final garnish, he sent it out to your table. But the actual cooking, the hours of careful preparation that went into creating what you just dismissed as cafeteria food, that was done by someone else entirely." The restaurant had grown so quiet that the soft jazz playing through the sound system seemed intrusive. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work, faces appearing in the pass window like ghosts watching a drama unfold. Henry, the maitre d', looked as if he wanted to intervene but couldn't quite decide how. "I don't understand," Marcus said, though something in his voice suggested that perhaps he was beginning to, that some instinct honed by years of corporate power plays was telling him the ground beneath his feet had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sofia moved with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to working in tight spaces, navigating around tables and chairs with an economy of movement that spoke of years spent in professional kitchens. She reached behind the bar and withdrew something, a small, well-worn notebook bound in black leather, its pages filled with what appeared to be recipes and notes written in several different languages. "This," she said, holding up the notebook, "contains the recipe I used for your beef bourguignon. It's been in my family for 4 generations, passed down from my great-grandmother who worked as a sous chef in Lyon before the war. The technique for browning the meat, the specific combination of wines used in the braising liquid, the precise temperature and timing for the vegetable cookery, all of it comes from traditions that predate most of the restaurants you've name-dropped tonight."
She opened the notebook, her fingers finding a particular page with the ease of long familiarity. The beef was seared at exactly 400 degrees for 90 seconds per side to create the Maillard reaction that forms the flavor foundation. The wine reduction used both a Côte du Rhône and a small amount of Armagnac, added at different stages to create layers of complexity. The stock was made from roasted beef bones that simmered for 18 hours with aromatics that were refreshed 3 times during the process. Marcus stared at her as if she had suddenly sprouted wings. You're a server. What could you possibly know about cooking?" Sofia's smile was sharp as a chef's knife. "About the molecular transformation that occurs when proteins denature under controlled heat? About the way proper technique can elevate simple ingredients into something transcendent." She quoted his own words back to him with perfect precision. "Perhaps more than you might expect." The chef who had emerged from the kitchen looked confused, glancing between Sofia and Marcus as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Sofia, what are you—" "Tell him, James," Sofia said without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Tell Mr. Wellington who actually prepared the bourguignon he just spent 20 minutes destroying." James, the head chef, ran a hand through his hair, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been admiration. "Sofia did. She's been helping us with some of our more challenging dishes. She has this way with French technique that I've never seen before." "Helping?" Sofia's laugh was musical but edged with steel. "James, we've discussed this. I haven't been helping. I've been carrying this kitchen through dinner service for the past 6 months, turning your adequate ingredients into the kind of food that keeps customers coming back." She moved closer to Marcus, who seemed frozen between confusion and growing comprehension. "You want to know about real training, Mr. Wellington? About restaurants that have earned their reputation through excellence? I trained at l'Institut Paul Bocuse in Lyon. I worked at Le Bernardin, yes, the same Le Bernardin you mentioned, under Eric Rippert himself. I spent 3 years at the Fat Duck, learning molecular gastronomy from Heston Blumenthal.
Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but Sofia held up a hand to stop him. You criticized the technique, so let me explain what actually went into this dish. The meat was marinated for 24 hours in wine and herbs, then seared in small batches to ensure proper caramelization. The sauce base took 6 hours to develop, with the wine reduced separately before being combined with a stock that simmered overnight. The vegetables were cooked individually and combined only at the final moment to preserve their individual textures and flavors. She set the fork down and looked directly at Marcus, her dark eyes blazing with controlled fury. You ate food prepared by someone who has dedicated their life to the craft you claim to understand, and you declared it unworthy without ever once considering that perhaps, just perhaps, your palate might not be as refined as your ego has convinced you it is. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked as if he wanted to disappear into the floor, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. The other diners were staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disgust, and he seemed to realize for the first time that his public display had consequences beyond his own satisfaction. I didn't know, he stammered, but Sofia wasn't finished with him yet. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. You saw a woman in an apron and decided she was less than you, someone you could abuse without consequence. You saw a dish that didn't match your preconceptions and declared it worthless, without ever considering that perhaps your understanding of what constitutes excellence might be limited by your own experience. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow felt more intimidating than shouting would have been. Let me tell you something about the restaurants you mentioned, Mr. Wellington. I've worked with Eric Rippert. I've staged with Thomas Keller. I've shared techniques with Ferran Adrià. And not one of them, not a single one, would approve of the way you just treated another human being in the name of culinary standards. The chef, James, stepped forward hesitantly. Sofia, I had no idea about your background. Why didn't you ever say anything? Sofia turned to him with an expression that mixed affection with exasperation. Because I wasn't ready to be a chef again. Because I needed time to heal, to remember why I started cooking in the first place. And because, she glanced back at Marcus, I learned more about this industry in 6 months of serving tables than I did in 20 years of running a kitchen. She addressed the room again, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding professional kitchens during the chaos of dinner service. This man just demonstrated everything that's wrong with food culture today. The obsession with prestige over substance, the worship of celebrity over skill, the belief that expensive equals excellence. He used his assumed authority to humiliate people who work hard to provide hospitality and nourishment, and he did it because he thought there would be no consequences. I apologize, he said as if he was unable to comprehend the damage he had caused. You apologize? Sofia's laugh was bitter. To whom? To me? To James, whose professional reputation you just attacked in front of his customers? To Henri, who has to deal with the aftermath of your tantrum? To the servers who had to watch you abuse their colleague? To the diners whose evening you ruined with your performance? She gestured toward the corner table where the elderly couple had been sitting. Do you see that table? That was Harold and Margaret Chen. Tonight was their 50th wedding anniversary, and they saved for months to eat here because Margaret always wanted to try French cuisine, but was too intimidated to come alone. They left 20 minutes ago because your screaming made her cry. Marcus followed her gaze to the empty table, and something in his face crumbled. I wasn't trying to. You weren't trying to hurt anyone except the people you thought were safe targets. You thought you could abuse the help without consequences, could demonstrate your superiority to an audience that would be impressed by your knowledge and your willingness to demand excellence.
Instead, you revealed yourself to be exactly the kind of person who makes the hospitality industry a hostile environment for anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of worthy. She moved back toward the bar, her movements carrying the fluid confidence of someone completely in control of the situation. You want to know what real excellence looks like, Mr. Wellington? It's not about being able to recite the names of famous restaurants or critique dishes you don't understand. It's about respect for ingredients, for technique, for the people who dedicate their lives to feeding others well. The woman who had been dining alone spoke up suddenly, her voice clear and confident. "Excuse me, but are you Sofia Marcher from Liqueur in Lyon?" Sofia turned, a genuine smile crossing her face for the first time since the confrontation began. "You know my restaurant? I ate there 3 years ago on my honeymoon," the woman said, her face lighting up with recognition and delight. "It was the most incredible meal of my life. The way you combine traditional techniques with modern presentation, the attention to every detail. I still have the menu. I kept it as a souvenir because I knew I had experienced something special."
Sofia's expression softened, and for a moment the warrior chef facade gave way to something more vulnerable, more human. "That means more to me than you could possibly know. Those memories, those connections, that's why we cook. Not for critics or awards, but for the moments when food becomes part of someone's story." Marcus was still standing beside his abandoned table, looking increasingly uncomfortable as he realized that every person in the restaurant was now looking at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning recognition that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "You know what the real tragedy is?" Sofia said, turning back to him with something approaching sympathy. "You could have had an extraordinary dining experience tonight. You could have tasted food prepared by someone who learned from the best chefs in the world, who put their heart and skill into every dish. Instead, you chose to perform your superiority, to demonstrate your knowledge by tearing down others, and in doing so, you missed the very thing you claimed to be seeking." She walked to his table and picked up the plate of beef bourguignon, studying it with the professional eye of someone who understood every element that had gone into its creation. "This dish tells a story, Mr. Wellington. It speaks of traditions passed down through generations, of techniques refined over centuries, of the alchemy that transforms simple ingredients into something greater than the sum of their parts. But you were so busy performing your expertise that you never actually tasted it. You never gave it the chance to speak to you." The kitchen doors swung open again, and several other staff members emerged, line cooks, prep cooks, dishwashers, all of them looking at Sofia with expressions of amazement and newfound respect. It was clear that none of them had known her true background, and the revelation was transforming how they saw not just her, but their entire workplace. The revelation of Sofia's true identity had transformed the atmosphere in Le Jardin from tense confrontation to something approaching theatrical drama. But Marcus Wellington III was far from finished with his performance. If anything, the discovery that he had been criticizing a Michelin-starred chef seemed to trigger something deeper and more desperate in him, a refusal to accept that his worldview had been so thoroughly demolished. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising again as he tried to regain control of the situation. "I don't care what credentials you claim to have. I know what I tasted, and it was substandard. No amount of storytelling is going to change the fact that the food was poorly executed." Sofia watched him with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. "Interesting. So even when presented with information that challenges your assumptions, you choose to double down rather than consider that you might have been wrong." "I'm not wrong about food," Marcus snapped, his face flushing red. "I have one of the most educated palates in this city. I've been featured in food magazines, consulted for restaurants, advised wine collectors. I know excellence when I taste it, and what you served me was not excellent." The woman who had recognized her from her Lyon restaurant laughed, actually laughed,
a sound of genuine disbelief. Are you serious? You're going to stand there and insist that a three-Michelin-star chef doesn't know how to cook? Marcus whirled toward her, his corporate instincts kicking in as he identified another target for his frustration. And who exactly are you to have an opinion? Let me guess, you went to one fancy restaurant on your honeymoon, and now you think you're qualified to discuss haute cuisine. The woman who had introduced herself as Patricia Rosen smiled with the confidence of someone who had just been handed a perfect opportunity. Actually, I'm the food critic for the Times. I've been reviewing restaurants for 15 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you just made a fool of yourself in front of one of the most talented chefs I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized he had just insulted not one, but two people whose professional credentials in the food world far exceeded his own. But instead of backing down, he seemed to grow more desperate, more aggressive, like a cornered animal lashing out at anything within reach. "Fine," he said, his voice taking on a nasty edge. "So, you're all in on this little charade. The mysterious chef, the convenient food critic, all rallying together to protect mediocre food and pretend it's something special. This is exactly what's wrong with the food scene today. Nobody wants to maintain real standards anymore." Henri, the maître d', finally found his voice. "Sir, I must ask you to lower your voice and show some respect for our other guests." "Respect?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about respect? I'm a customer who paid good money for what was supposed to be a quality dining experience, and I'm being lectured by a waitress and her friends about how I should appreciate subpar food. Where's the respect for my experience, my expertise, my right to expect excellence for my money?"
Sofia moved then, not toward Marcus, but toward the kitchen, and returned a moment later carrying a plate that held what appeared to be a simple piece of fish with vegetables. She set it on the bar and looked directly at Marcus. "Since you're so confident in your palate," she said, her voice carrying the challenge like a sword being drawn, "perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your expertise. Tell everyone in this room exactly what's wrong with this dish." Marcus approached the plate with the swagger of someone who believed he was about to prove his point definitively. He cut a piece of the fish, tasted it, chewed thoughtfully, and then his expression shifted to one of obvious confusion. "This is," he began, then stopped, tasting again. The fish was perfectly cooked. The vegetables had been prepared with obvious skill, and the sauce that accompanied it was complex and beautifully balanced. It was, by any objective measure, exceptional food. "Go ahead," Sofia encouraged, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Tell us what's wrong with it. Explain to everyone here how this dish fails to meet your exacting standards." Marcus took another bite, his jaw working as he tried to find fault with what was clearly a masterfully prepared piece of fish. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he searched for criticism that wouldn't come, his face growing redder with each passing second. The seasoning is," he began, then stopped, because the seasoning was perfect, delicate, precise, enhancing rather than overwhelming the natural flavors of the fish. "Yes," Sofia prompted, her voice carrying the patience of a teacher waiting for a struggling student to work through a problem. "It's the texture." Marcus tried again, but even he seemed to realize how ridiculous he sounded. The fish was cooked to perfection, flaking easily but still moist, with a perfectly crispy skin that spoke of expert technique. Patricia Rosen had taken out her phone and was recording the interaction, her eyes bright with the enthusiasm of a journalist who had stumbled onto an incredible story. "This is fascinating," she murmured. "Please continue. We're all very interested in your professional assessment." The pressure of being watched, of having his expertise challenged so publicly, seemed to push Marcus past some invisible breaking point. "You know what?" he said, his voice rising to a shout. "I don't have to justify my opinions to any of you. I know what I like, I know what quality tastes like, and I don't care what fancy schools you went to or what awards you've won. If I say the food is bad, then it's bad."
The statement hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire, and the silence that followed was deafening. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to stare through the pass window at the spectacle unfolding in their dining room. Sofia nodded slowly, as if Marcus had just confirmed something she had suspected all along. "And there it is," she said quietly. "The truth behind all the pretension, all the name-dropping, all the claims about refined palates and educated taste. When challenged to actually demonstrate his expertise, when faced with food that even he can't deny is well prepared, he falls back on the ultimate defense of the ignorant. I'm right because I say I'm right." She moved closer to him, her presence somehow both non-threatening and absolutely commanding. "Let me explain something to you about palate, Mr. Wellington. A truly educated palate isn't about being able to find fault with everything you taste. It's about being able to recognize quality when you encounter it, regardless of where you find it. It's about understanding that great food can come from a street cart in Bangkok or a three-star restaurant in Paris, and that the price you pay has very little to do with the skill and care that goes into preparation." Marcus seemed to realize that he was losing the room entirely. The other diners were no longer watching with fascination, they were looking at him with undisguised disgust. The young man who had been celebrating his promotion was shaking his head in disbelief. An older gentleman near the window had actually stood up and was applauding Sofia softly. "You people don't understand," Marcus said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "I've eaten at the best restaurants in the world. I've met famous chefs. I've been to exclusive tastings. I have connections in the industry that most people could only dream of. I know what I'm talking about." "Do you?" Sofia asked, and her voice carried a gentleness that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. "That fish was caught this morning by a fisherman who's been working these waters for 30 years. It was prepared using a technique I learned from a chef in Provence who spent his entire career perfecting the timing and temperature required to achieve that texture. The vegetables were grown by a farmer who understands soil composition and seasonal timing better than most scientists. The sauce took me 4 hours to prepare, with ingredients sourced from 3 different continents." Marcus opened his mouth to interrupt, but Sofia held up a hand to stop him. "But none of that matters if you can't taste it. And the fact that you tried to find fault with it even after experiencing its quality tells me everything I need to know about your palate, your judgment, and your character."
The confrontation had attracted the attention of other staff members throughout the restaurant. Servers from neighboring sections had drifted over, ostensibly to work, but clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding. In the kitchen, line cooks were abandoning their stations to peer through the pass window. Even dishwashers had emerged from the back to witness what was becoming restaurant legend in real time. James, the head chef, stepped forward again, his earlier embarrassment replaced by something approaching awe. "Sofia, I owe you an apology. We all do. You've been working alongside us for months, helping us improve our food, and we never recognized—" "You never recognized what was right in front of you," Sofia finished for him, but her tone toward him was gentle, forgiving. "Because you, like most people in this industry, have been trained to believe that expertise comes with credentials and announcements. You assumed that someone taking orders couldn't possibly know more about cooking than someone in chef's whites." She turned back to Marcus, who seemed to be shrinking visibly under the weight of universal disapproval. But that assumption, that judgment based on appearance and social position rather than actual knowledge or skill, is exactly what allowed tonight's performance to happen. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "I don't care what any of you think. I'm a valued customer, I have influence in this city, and I can destroy this restaurant's reputation with a few phone calls. I have connections, resources, power that none of you can match." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and for a moment the room held its breath. But Sofia's response was not what anyone expected. She laughed. It wasn't bitter or angry, it was genuinely amused, the sound of someone who had just heard something so absurd that she couldn't help but be entertained by it. "Power?" she said, wiping her eyes. "You think you have power? Let me tell you something about real power in the food industry, Mr. Wellington. Real power is being able to create something that brings people joy, that nourishes them not just physically, but emotionally. Real power is building relationships with farmers and suppliers who trust you with their best products. Real power is training young cooks to carry forward traditions while developing their own voices. She gestured around the restaurant, taking in all the faces watching their exchange. You think you can destroy this restaurant's reputation? The only reputation being destroyed tonight is your own. Everyone in this room has witnessed your behavior. And in the age of social media, word travels fast. Patricia Rosen holds up her phone with a smile. Actually, I've been live tweeting this entire exchange. My followers are fascinated by what they're calling the Wellington meltdown. It's already trending. Marcus's face went white as he realized the implications. You have no right to report on something that happened in a public place? To share a story about food industry culture and customer behavior? Patricia's smile was sharp. Actually, I have every right. And frankly, this is one of the most important stories I've covered in years. It perfectly illustrates the toxic relationship between privilege and hospitality that's been poisoning our industry. Sofia moved to the center of the dining room, addressing not just Marcus, but everyone present. This is what we deal with every day in restaurants. Customers who confuse their ability to pay with their right to abuse, who think that tipping gives them permission to treat service staff as less than human. And the tragedy is that most of the time we have to smile and take it, because we need the job, because we've been taught that the customer is always right, even when they're clearly wrong. An older woman at a corner table, someone who had been quiet throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly spoke up. I've been coming to this restaurant for 5 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The way you just treated that young woman, it was disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Her voice shook with emotion, and her words seemed to unlock something in the other diners. The young man celebrating his promotion stood up. I work in customer service, and if one of my clients treated my staff the way you just treated her, they'd be banned from our business permanently. Another voice joined in, then another. The mood in the room was shifting from fascination to active hostility toward Marcus, and he seemed to realize that he had lost not just the argument, but the entire room. This is insane, he said, his voice cracking with stress. I'm the victim here. I paid good money for a meal, I expressed my legitimate concerns about quality, and now I'm being attacked by a mob for having standards. Sofia's expression softened with something that might have been pity. No, Mr. Wellington, you're being held accountable. For the first time in what I suspect is a long time, someone is refusing to enable your behavior, refusing to pretend that cruelty is acceptable as long as it comes with a big enough check. She moved closer to him, her voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow felt more intimate and therefore more devastating than shouting would have been. You want to know what's really tragic about tonight? You could have learned something. You could have discovered new flavors, new techniques, new ways of thinking about food. Instead, you chose to perform your superiority, to demonstrate your power over people you assumed couldn't fight back.
Marcus looked around the room desperately, seeking some ally, some friendly face, but found none. Every person present, staff and customers alike, was looking at him with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The young couple at table 6 had actually moved their chairs so they could face away from him. The businessman dining alone was pointedly ignoring him while texting furiously on his phone. You know what the worst part is? Sofia continued, her voice carrying clearly throughout the restaurant. You're not unusual. You're not some rare monster who wandered in here tonight. You're representative of a whole class of people who think their money gives them the right to treat service workers as objects, as targets for their frustration, as entertainment for their cruelty. She gestured to the servers and kitchen staff who had gathered to watch the confrontation. Every person wearing an apron in this room has stories like tonight. Stories of customers who felt entitled to abuse them, to question their intelligence, to treat them as if they weren't fully human. And most of the time, we have to smile
and say thank you and come back soon, because that's what survival in this industry requires. Marcus tried one more time to regain control. "I want to speak to the manager. I want to file a complaint about this treatment. This is harassment, and I won't stand for it." Henry stepped forward, his diplomatic mask finally slipping to reveal the anger beneath. "Sir, I am the manager. And frankly, after witnessing your behavior tonight, I think it would be best if you left. Immediately." "You can't throw me out. I'm a paying customer. I have rights." "You have the right to be treated with basic human dignity," Henry replied, his French accent thickening with emotion. "Just as our staff has the right not to be verbally abused by customers who mistake their privilege for permission to be cruel. You forfeited your welcome here the moment you decided that paying for a meal gave you license to attack another human being." Sofia watched the exchange with satisfaction, but there was something else in her expression. A sadness that spoke to deeper issues, systemic problems that went far beyond one man's bad behavior. "This isn't really about the food," she said, addressing the room as much as Marcus. "It never was. This is about power, about a culture that teaches some people they're entitled to treat others as less than human. It's about an industry that has normalized abuse in the name of customer service, that has taught workers to accept cruelty as part of the job." She looked directly at Marcus, who seemed to be shrinking under the weight of universal condemnation. "You attacked the food because you thought it was safe. You thought you could demonstrate your superiority by tearing down something you assumed had been created by people who couldn't defend themselves. You thought wrong." The room fell silent again, and in that silence, the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing seemed unnaturally loud. He looked around one more time, seeking some escape, some way to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of the evening, but found none. I will be reporting this to corporate. This treatment of customers is unacceptable. You'll all be hearing from my lawyers." Patricia rose and looked up from her phone with obvious delight. "Oh, please do. I'd love to do a follow-up story about how you're attempting to sue a restaurant for defending their staff against verbal abuse. Our editor is going to love this." Marcus seemed to realize that every word he spoke was only making his situation worse. He threw some money on the table, far more than his bill would have been, and headed for the door with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing a disaster of their own making. But Sofia wasn't finished with him yet. "Mr. Wellington," she called out, her voice stopping him just short of the exit. "I hope you learned something tonight. Not about food. I suspect that's beyond your capabilities, but about the difference between having standards and having humanity." He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, and for a moment it seemed like he might turn around, might say something that could salvage some small piece of dignity from the wreckage of the evening. Instead, he pushed through the door and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a restaurant full of people who had just witnessed something unprecedented. The silence that followed his departure was different from the tense quiet that had characterized the confrontation. This was the silence of people processing what they had just experienced, of staff and customers alike trying to understand the magnitude of what had unfolded. Sofia stood in the center of the dining room, her server's apron still tied around her waist, her notebook still clutched in her hands, looking like a general who had just won a battle she didn't ask to fight. "Well," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of exhaustion that spoke to the emotional toll of the confrontation. "That was interesting." The understatement broke the tension like a dam bursting, and suddenly the restaurant was filled with voices, customers talking excitedly about what they had witnessed, staff members expressing amazement and admiration, everyone trying to process the revelation that they had been in the presence of culinary greatness without knowing it. But beneath the excitement and chatter, there was something deeper happening, a recognition that they had witnessed more than just one man's humiliation. They had seen a system exposed, a culture challenged, a moment of justice in an industry that rarely provides it. And at the center of it all stood Sofia Marcher, still wearing her server's apron, still holding her grandmother's recipe book, having just reminded everyone present that dignity has nothing to do with position, that expertise can't be assumed from appearance, and that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone assumes has no power at all. The departure of Marcus Wellington III left Les Jardins in a state of electric anticipation, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. For a long moment, nobody moved. Servers stood frozen between tables, diners sat with forks halfway to their mouths, and even the soft jazz seemed to pause in acknowledgement of what had just transpired. Then, Patricia Rosen began to clap. It started as a slow, deliberate applause, the sound sharp and clear in the silence. One by one, others joined her. First, the older woman who had spoken out against Marcus's behavior, then the young man celebrating his promotion, then the businessman who had been texting throughout the confrontation. Within moments, the entire restaurant was applauding, and all eyes were on Sofia, who stood in the center of the dining room looking stunned by the response. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention, "you have just witnessed something extraordinary. You've seen one of the most talented chefs in the world defend not just herself, but every service worker who has ever been forced to smile while being verbally abused by someone who mistakes their money for moral authority." Sofia raised her hands, trying to quiet the applause, but Patricia wasn't finished. "This woman," she continued, gesturing toward Sofia, "earned 3 Michelin stars at Liqueur in Lyon. She trained under Eric Ripert, staged with Thomas Keller, worked alongside some of the greatest culinary minds of our generation. And for the past 6 months, she's been serving your tables, preparing your food, and enduring treatment that no human being should have to tolerate." The applause grew louder, and Sofia's eyes filled with tears, the first sign of vulnerability she had shown throughout the entire confrontation. James, the head chef, stepped forward and gently took her arm. "Sofia, I owe you more than an apology. We all do. The way you've been working alongside us, teaching us, improving everything we do, we should have known. We should have recognized your skill." Sofia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a slight smudge on her cheek that somehow made her seem more human, more approachable despite the revelation of her extraordinary credentials. "You couldn't have known because I didn't want you to know. I needed time to remember who I was before everything fell apart." Henri approached with the reverence of someone approaching a shrine. "Mademoiselle Marchetti, if I may, ask why? Why take a position as a server when you could have worked in any kitchen in the world?" Sofia looked around the restaurant, taking in the faces of staff and customers who were hanging on her every word. "Because," she said simply, "I needed to remember why I started cooking in the first place. When you're running a Michelin-starred restaurant, you can forget that food is about more than technique and presentation. You can lose sight of the fact that every meal is an act of hospitality, that every dish you send out has the potential to become part of someone's memory." She moved to the table where the young couple had been celebrating, running her fingers along the edge of the white tablecloth. "6 months ago, I thought I understood the restaurant business. I thought success was measured in stars and reviews and profit margins. Then, I lost everything. And I realized I had never actually understood what we do here." An older man near the window, someone who had been quietly observing throughout the evening, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I'm Robert Chen. The lady who left earlier, Margaret, she's my wife. 50 years married today." His voice cracked slightly. "We saved for months to come here. She always wanted to try French food, but she was intimidated. Tonight was supposed to be special." Sofia's face crumpled with genuine anguish. "Mr. Chen, I am so sorry. Your anniversary was ruined because I allowed that confrontation to escalate instead of ending it quickly."
"No," Robert said firmly, standing up from his table. "Our anniversary was ruined by a man who thought his money gave him the right to abuse other people. But you know what? Margaret and I have been talking outside, and we want to come back. Tomorrow night, if you'll have us.
Because what we witnessed here, the way you stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't fight back, that's something worth celebrating. The offer hung in the air like the aroma of something wonderful cooking, and Sofia looked around the restaurant with new eyes. The staff members who had gathered to watch the confrontation weren't just observers anymore. They were looking at her with a mixture of awe and hope, as if her presence had transformed not just the evening, but their understanding of what was possible. "There's something I need to tell all of you," Sofia said, addressing the room. "When I lost my restaurant in Lyon, I thought my career was over. I thought the betrayal of my business partner had destroyed not just my financial future, but my identity as a chef. I came here broken, humiliated, convinced that I had nothing left to offer." She moved between the tables, her presence somehow both commanding and intimate. "But working here, serving you, watching how you respond to food prepared with care, it reminded me that cooking isn't about impressing critics or earning stars. It's about nourishment, about creating moments of joy, about the ancient human tradition of sharing sustenance." James stepped forward again, his face flushed with excitement and nervousness. "Sofia, I have to ask, would you consider staying? Not as a server, but as whatever you want to be. Our executive chef, our partner, our teacher. This kitchen could be amazing with your guidance." Sofia looked at him for a long moment, then at Henri, then at the gathered staff members who were watching her with barely concealed hope. "I appreciate the offer, James, but I don't think I'm ready to go back to running a kitchen. Not yet." The disappointment was visible on faces throughout the room, but Sofia held up a hand. "However," she continued, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I might be interested in a different kind of arrangement. What if we created something new here? Not a traditional hierarchy, but a collaborative kitchen where everyone contributes their knowledge and skills." She turned to address the entire restaurant. What if Le Jardin became a place where great food wasn't just about following recipes, but about understanding the stories behind them? Where servers weren't just order takers, but ambassadors for the culinary traditions we're sharing? Where every person who works here understands that they're part of something larger than just a business? Patricia Rosen was taking notes furiously, her journalistic instincts recognizing a story that went far beyond one evening's drama. "This is fascinating," she murmured. "A Michelin-starred chef choosing collaboration over hierarchy, choosing teaching over commanding. This could revolutionize how we think about restaurant culture." Sofia nodded toward her. "Ms. Rosen, you said earlier that this story illustrates toxic relationships in our industry, but I'd like it to illustrate something else as well. The possibility of change, of building something better." She moved to the bar and retrieved her leather notebook, opening it to a page filled with sketches and notes. "This book contains recipes from my great-grandmother, techniques I learned from master chefs, innovations I developed over 20 years of cooking. But it also contains something else, ideas for a different kind of restaurant, one where the focus isn't on creating an exclusive experience for the wealthy, but on making exceptional food accessible to everyone." A young server named Maria, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sofia, could you really teach us? I mean, really teach us, not just how to serve, but how to understand what we're serving." Sofia's face lit up with genuine joy, the first completely unguarded expression she had shown all evening. "Maria, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Food is a language, and right now most restaurants have servers who can't speak it fluently. But imagine if every person who worked here could explain not just what's in a dish, but why it's prepared that way, what traditions it represents, how the flavors are meant to work together." She looked around the room, her excitement building as she spoke. "Imagine if customers didn't just order food, but engaged in conversations about culinary traditions. Imagine if dining out became an educational experience, a cultural exchange, a chance to learn something new about the world through taste. Henri was nodding enthusiastically, his diplomatic reserve giving way to genuine excitement. This could work. This could really work. We already have customers who are interested in more than just eating, people who want to understand what they're experiencing. Exactly, Sofia said, moving to the center of the room again. And tonight proved something important. People are hungry for authenticity, for real knowledge, for experiences that go beyond surface-level consumption. They want to be part of something meaningful. The businessman who had been texting throughout the evening looked up from his phone. I have to say, I came here tonight expecting a simple dinner, and instead I witnessed something that's going to change how I think about restaurants forever. If you're serious about this collaborative approach, I'd be interested in discussing investment opportunities.
Sofia held up a hand, smiling. Thank you, but this isn't about investment or expansion. This is about proving that we can create something sustainable and meaningful on a human scale. If it works here, if we can demonstrate that this model creates better experiences for both staff and customers, then maybe it can be replicated elsewhere. She turned to James, her expression growing serious. But this only works if everyone is committed to changing how we think about hierarchy, about expertise, about who has the right to make decisions. It means treating dishwashers and line cooks as essential contributors to the creative process. It means recognizing that great ideas can come from anywhere. James nodded eagerly. I've been cooking professionally for 15 years, and I've never felt like I had permission to actually contribute to the creative process. Most kitchens are dictatorships where only the chef gets to have ideas. And that's exactly what needs to change, Sofia said. Great restaurants aren't built by great chefs. They're built by great teams. Tonight, when Mr. Wellington was attacking the food, every person in that kitchen felt personally insulted because they had contributed to creating it. That's the kind of investment and pride we want to cultivate. An elderly woman at a corner table raised her hand tentatively. Excuse me, dear, but I'm curious. What would this mean for customers? How would our experience change? Sofia moved toward her table, her manner warm and inviting. Mrs. Henderson, Dorothy Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, it would mean that when you come to dinner, you're not just purchasing a meal. You're engaging with a community of people who are passionate about food and eager to share that passion with you. Instead of being served by someone who knows nothing about what they're bringing you, you'd be guided by people who can tell you stories about the ingredients, the techniques, the cultural traditions behind each dish. Dorothy's eyes lit up with understanding. Like having dinner with friends who happen to be wonderful cooks. Exactly, Sofia said, beaming. Food is meant to bring people together, to create connections, to build community. But somewhere along the way, restaurants became about creating distance between servers and customers, between kitchen and dining room, between the people who prepare food and the people who eat it. Patricia looked up from her notes. This is revolutionary. You're talking about dismantling the entire hierarchical structure that defines restaurant culture. Sofia nodded. And replacing it with something based on collaboration, education, and genuine hospitality. Not the performative kind of hospitality that we're trained to provide, but the real thing. The desire to take care of people, to nourish them, to make them feel welcome and valued. She looked around the room, taking in the faces of staff and customers who were absorbing her words with varying degrees of excitement and skepticism. I know it sounds idealistic. I know there are practical challenges, but tonight proved something important. People are ready for change. They're tired of toxic behavior being normalized, tired of accepting that abuse is just part of the restaurant experience. Maria, the young server, spoke up again. But how do we make it work financially?
I mean, collaborative restaurants sound wonderful, but we still need to pay rent and salaries. Sofia smiled at the practical question. Actually, this model could be more profitable than traditional restaurant structures. When staff members are genuinely invested in the success of the restaurant, when they understand and can articulate the value of what they're serving, customer satisfaction increases dramatically. Happy, knowledgeable staff create loyal customers. She pulled out her phone and showed them a photo of a simple, elegant dining room. This was Lucour, my restaurant in Lyon. We operated on exactly this principle: collaborative kitchen, educated service staff, customers who became part of our community. Our profit margins were higher than most restaurants our size because we had virtually no staff turnover, and our customers came back again and again. Henri leaned forward with interest. How did you handle the practical aspects? Scheduling, inventory, decision-making?
We had weekly meetings where everyone, from dishwashers to servers to cooks, contributed ideas for new dishes, improvements to service, solutions to problems. We rotated responsibilities so everyone understood every aspect of the operation, and we shared profits based on contribution, not just position. James was practically vibrating with excitement. This could solve so many problems: staff retention, customer satisfaction, creative stagnation. And, Sofia added, her voice growing stronger, it could help prevent situations like what happened tonight. When staff members feel valued and empowered, when they understand that they're partners rather than subordinates, they're better equipped to handle difficult customers with confidence rather than submission. She looked toward the door where Marcus had made his ignominious exit. That man was able to behave the way he did because he assumed he was dealing with people who had no power, no recourse, no ability to defend themselves. In a collaborative restaurant, abuse simply isn't tolerated, not by management, not by staff, and not by other customers. Robert Chen, who had been listening intently, stood up again. You know, my wife and I have been married 50 years, and we've seen a lot of changes in how people treat each other. What happened here tonight, both the abuse and the response to it, gives me hope that maybe we're finally learning to value human dignity over social status. Sofia moved toward him, her expression deeply moved. Mr. Chen, would you and your wife consider being part of our first collaborative dinner tomorrow night as our guests, so we can show you what hospitality looks like when it's built on respect rather than subservience? We would be honored, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. And Margaret is going to be so excited when I tell her. She's been talking about nothing but that young woman who stood up for herself and everyone else. Patricia closed her notebook and looked around the room. I think I'm witnessing the birth of something significant here. Not just a new restaurant model, but a new way of thinking about work, about dignity, about community. Sofia nodded. That's exactly what I hope this becomes. Not just a restaurant, but a demonstration that we can create working environments where everyone is valued, where expertise is recognized regardless of position, where the goal is collective success rather than individual power. She moved to the window and looked out at the street where Marcus had disappeared. You know, I almost feel sorry for him. He spent the entire evening trying to prove his superiority, and in the process, he revealed his fundamental insecurity. People who truly understand food, who genuinely appreciate culinary excellence, don't need to tear down others to demonstrate their knowledge. Henry joined her at the window. Do you think he learned anything tonight? Sofia considered the question seriously. Maybe. Sometimes it takes public humiliation to force people to examine their behavior. But even if he doesn't change, everyone else in this room witnessed what happened. They saw that abuse has consequences, that knowledge can come from unexpected sources, that dignity isn't determined by social position. She turned back to face the restaurant, where staff and customers were still buzzing with excitement and possibility. And in that moment,
standing in the warm light of Le Jardin, surrounded by people who had just witnessed the power of dignity and expertise to triumph over privilege and prejudice. Sofia Marcher looked exactly like she was, a master chef who had found her way home.
3 months after that transformative evening at Le Jardin, the restaurant had become something entirely unprecedented in the culinary world, a place where the traditional boundaries between kitchen and dining room, between staff and customers, between education and hospitality had dissolved into something altogether more meaningful. Sofia stood in the center of what had once been a conventional restaurant kitchen, watching as Maria carefully demonstrated the proper technique for brunoise to a table of fascinated diners who had requested to observe the preparation of their vegetables. The kitchen had been redesigned with floor-to-ceiling glass panels that could be opened to create an integrated space where cooking became performance, education, and collaboration all at once. The key, Maria was explaining, her confidence a stark contrast to the tentative server she had been just 3 months earlier, is understanding that the uniform size isn't just about aesthetics. When vegetables are cut to exactly the same dimensions, they cook at exactly the same rate, which means every bite has the perfect texture and flavor development. Sofia smiled as she watched the diners lean forward with genuine interest, asking questions about knife technique and ingredient selection that would have been impossible to answer in the old model, where servers knew nothing about the food they were carrying. What did you think of Sofia's incredible transformation from server to revered master chef? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of people who prove that respect and dignity matter more than status. This was exactly what she had envisioned: food as a bridge to understanding, meals as opportunities for genuine cultural exchange. James emerged from what had been the traditional kitchen area, carrying a plate that held what appeared to be a simple piece of roasted chicken, but was actually the result of a technique he had developed through weeks of collaboration with Sofia and the rest of the team. The bird had been dry-aged for 2 weeks, then cooked using a method that combined traditional French technique with innovations suggested by Carlos, their former dishwasher, who had turned out to have an intuitive understanding of temperature and timing that surpassed most formally trained cooks. Table 12 is asking about the aging process, James said, setting the plate down for Sofia's inspection. Should I bring Carlos out to explain his contribution to the technique? Sofia nodded, tasting the chicken and noting the incredible depth of flavor that the collaborative approach had achieved. Absolutely. And make sure they understand that this dish exists because we believe good ideas can come from anywhere. Carlos discovered that aging the bird at precisely 38 degrees created texture changes that traditional methods never achieved. As James headed back to the dining room, Sofia looked around at the transformed space that had become so much more than a restaurant. Through the glass panels, she could see customers engaged in animated conversations with staff members who were no longer just servers, but culinary ambassadors, sharing stories about ingredients and techniques with genuine passion. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Rosen. 6-month follow-up article published tomorrow. Le Jardin's collaborative model is being studied by hospitality schools across 3 continents. You've started a revolution. Sofia smiled, remembering the broken woman who had arrived here 8 months ago, convinced her career was over. That night with Marcus Wellington had been the catalyst, but this transformation, this proof that dignity and respect could create something more profitable and sustainable than hierarchy and abuse, this was the real victory. The evening service was winding down, and as Sofia watched her team clean and prepare for tomorrow with the same collaborative spirit they brought to cooking, she realized she had found something more valuable than Michelin stars or critical acclaim. She had found a way to make the restaurant industry more human, one meal at a time.